Hey everyone, I am super happy to be here today. I'm going to be talking to you about how to teach an old monitoring system new tricks. No prizes for guessing which old monitoring system I might be talking about. My clicker's not working, that's sad. Hello, all right. We'll make it work. Hi, I'm Katherine Daniels. You can find me on the Twitters as BeerOps. I'm a senior web operations engineer at Etsy, co-author of Effective DevOps. So if you would prefer to stop doing DevOps ineffectively, check out the book. It's got a yak on the cover. And I am a frequent Monitorama attendee, unlike that Pete Cheslock fellow who has only been to 4 of the Monitoramas. This is actually my 5th one. So thank you to Jason for continuing to make this such an awesome conference and for continuing to let me come and say words. I'm going to take you through a hypothetical day in the life of a web operations engineer at Etsy and kind of talk through some of the ways that we approach monitoring. So I'm going to talk about deploying new servers and deploying other changes to our old monitoring system. Going to try and explain some of the ways that we make getting alerts a little bit less annoying. I'm going to talk about sleep and on-call tracking, and I'm going to end with an on-call bedtime story. Etsy is an online global marketplace for handmade and vintage goods. We are also known as a monitoring and alerting company that also runs a website where you can buy handmade tea cozies. We've got our headquarters in Brooklyn, which is the office that I work out of. Some numbers, because everyone loves numbers and scale. We've got, as of the first quarter this year, 25 million active buyers, 1.6 million active sellers, and in 2015 we had $2.39 billion in GMS. That's gross merchandise sales, or the total dollar value of the tea cozies and other delightful goods bought and sold on our site. So I want to start out by saying that I'm not here to start any sort of flame war about which monitoring system is best. I know that there's probably people who are thinking, oh my God, why are you still using Nagios? You should be using some shiny new thing. And also you're pronouncing it wrong. It's Nagios or Nagios or... Let's not even go there. I'm not here to have that kind of argument with people. I'm here to talk about ways of customizing Nagios or maybe other monitoring solutions to suit some needs. Now, if you do want to have those kinds of arguments, which I'm sure some people do because we're people who have opinions about monitoring, shocking at a monitoring conference, my colleague Lori wrote a blog post explaining some of the reasons that he likes Nagios, why we are still using it, why it works for us at Etsy. He was really surprised to note that bit.ly/yay Nagios was not taken as a URL. So if you want to read some of his opinions and yell at him on the internet, feel free to go there and do that after this. It's also important to point out that even though Nagios is old and maybe not the best for some of today's new environments and infrastructures, it still is like the #1 most popularly, commonly used monitoring system. This was a survey done by James Turnbull, who literally wrote the book on monitoring. It's an awesome book, you should check it out. Nagios, #1. Also, there's 11 people who answered that they aren't using any monitoring tool, so if you're gonna yell at somebody, yell at those 11 people. Now, I will admit that Nagios is not the best fit for everything. There's all this new cloud, serverless, no-ops, whatever, that Pete stole my unicorn slide, but mine is pooping 100% uptime, so take that. I will admit that Nagios is not suited for every infrastructure in every situation, but if you do have, a more stable, a more static infrastructure, there are still use cases where Nagios fits. So I don't want to focus too much on the specific tool, but kind of how we are using it and how other people can use it. So I'm going to take you through this hypothetical day in the life of doing ops at Etsy. Unlike real-life ops at Etsy, this talk will have fewer cat pictures, but don't worry, there's still going to be cat pictures. So the first thing that you might do is build some new servers. Insert serverless joke here. Again, I know that it's the cool new thing, and some people like it and some people like me like to make fun of it because serverless is actually made of servers. There's still servers in there somewhere, no matter how much you abstract them away. And fun fact about Etsy, we actually love servers. We have 3 data centers, 2 in New Jersey, 1 on this coast for disaster recovery, about 3,000 servers overall, which means that we have to provision them, and then we have to get them into Nagios. Now, 5 or 6 years ago, this used to be literally the worst thing ever because back then we had everything configured by hand with lovely handcrafted Nagios config files, and people would make changes by SSHing into the Nagios host and lovingly handcrafting their changes and then restarting Nagios and praying. Don't do that, not a good idea. We have moved on since then, and we decided we've got this great tool that we wrote called Deployinator. It's open sourced, it's a little web interface that has these buttons that you can click to deploy things, and you can wrap whatever logic you want into those buttons. So we have this common interface, this common tool that we use across Etsy to do deployments, and we said, we can deploy Nagios this way as well. We started using templates, we stopped handcrafting our Nagios configs, and we said, what if we used Chef as our single source of truth to figure out which hosts need to be in Nagios? So when you test this, when you run this build and test configuration button as the first step of the deploy process, it runs a Chef recipe that does a Chef search, and it finds the nodes that are currently in Chef, and it compares that with what hosts are currently in Nagios, and then it will generate or remove configuration files automatically instead of us having to say by hand which servers we want to have. We also do things like automatically generating host groups based on Chef roles. We wanted to give people some chances to make sure that their configurations were working before they started this deploy process, though. We did this by way of our try library, which is something else that we use pretty commonly across deployments at Etsy. So when you make your changes, now you are making local changes on a development VM that you have, and you run this try Nagios. And what it does is the try library lets you get a diff of your changes, ship that patch over to our Jenkins servers, and because the Nagios binary is nice and lightweight and small, we can have that exist on the Jenkins servers and use it to run the built-in Nagios-V configuration checker. And it gives us the results of that, and it then tells you whether or not it succeeded. So we can see here that there's a couple warnings that we might want to look into, but it tells us that it has validated the config across all of our data centers. So I mentioned we have 3 actual data centers. We have a 4th data center that is the office because we have a Nagios instance running and monitoring the few pieces of hardware that we have in the office. So we have 4 data centers, and this try library allows us to pretty much automatically verify that the config will be valid not just in one data center, but in all 4 of them, because that was something that we had run into in years past, where somebody would make a change in one data center and then it would break in the other ones. It's all well and good to make sure that the configuration is valid and the syntax is correct and all that, but we wanted to go a little bit farther. So my colleague Ryan France wrote a gem that he is in the process of open sourcing called Nagios Validate that allows you to set up custom validation, and we're using this to encourage good Nagios hygiene. So at the end of the try Nagios run, Nagios Validate runs. And you can see here it says validating that modified definitions are not missing contact group definitions. This is important because the way that we use Nagios, we have a template that means that if you don't specify a contact group, it will page ops. It'll use that contact group. Because we're ops people and we're a little bit paranoid and we're like, oh God, what if we miss something? That would be terrible. So we defaulted to paging ourselves. But as more and more people started using Nagios, different engineering teams will set up their own on-call rotas, which is great. We encourage them to do that, to own their own uptime and availability. We found that not everyone was aware of this default setting in the template, and ops started getting paged accidentally more than we would like to. So with Nagios Validate, if you don't specify a contact group, it will now warn you And it'll say, hey, you're gonna page ops. Are you sure you wanna do that? We debated having a little clippy pop up and ask you, but that seemed like too much work on the command line. So now you can still push out a deploy with an empty contact group, but it'll warn you. So we're trying to encourage people to make this explicit rather than implicit. And again, because this is something that we can customize, if we run into other issues that we would like to check for before we have people deploy changes, we can just add those with this gem. Another thing about our deploy process is adding hosts. And I mentioned that we use Chef Search to add hosts. This used to run every 10 minutes, and any host that had been built within the last 10 minutes, Chef would run. It runs every 10 minutes, and it would just deploy those new hosts, whether or not they were actually ready to go into Nagios. That wasn't super great, so we decided to do a couple things. We added in this information. We're now making it visible, so it will tell you, hey, these hosts are going to be added. It tells you who built the host. We have metadata from our host provisioning system. So it says, okay, here's the person who built the host. It tells you the chef role and the cobbler profile that were used just for a little additional information and context about hosts that you're adding. We had it stop adding and deploying Nagios automatically every 10 minutes when Chef ran, so it now does this only when people specifically do a deploy in Deployinator. And we also decided that we were going to have hosts automatically go into downtime in Nagios when they get deployed. Now at this point, I feel like I should clarify what it is that I mean by downtime. In Nagios, you can specify that that hosts or services will go into scheduled downtime. So if we need to reboot a host for like a glibc vulnerability, not that that ever happens, we can put the host into downtime in Nagios before we reboot it so that it doesn't freak out in pages and be like, oh my God, the host's down. And we're like, yeah, I know it's down, I'm rebooting it. Like, calm yourself. So when I say downtime, I am talking about periods of scheduled downtime in Nagios, not about us taking Etsy.com down. We try and avoid doing that as a general rule. So Deployinator now puts hosts into downtime when they get deployed until noon Eastern time the next business day. There's a Ruby gem that somehow magically handles that date math. That's pretty cool. And it will also, for more visibility, tell us in IRC that the host has gone into downtime and who built the host. So yes, we use IRC. We're not cool enough to use Slack. We have a whole bunch of IRC bots. It's just lousy with robots telling us information about things. So they tell us, like, hey, this box got deployed into Nagios, and now it's going into downtime. We also have robots now tell us about when this downtime in Nagios is going to expire. Because we have this metadata from our provisioning system, and it puts the downtime on behalf of the person who built the host, it will also remind the person who built the host that that downtime is going to expire, because we have so many different people working on Nagios that the person who built a given host is not necessarily the person who deployed that change. Somebody could make a change to a configuration file, they could add a check, they could edit an existing check, and during that deploy, they could end up bringing in a whole bunch of hosts built by various different people into production. So we wanted to make sure that the people who built the hosts are the ones getting annoyed by them. We're also big into chat ops, so we have a few more Nagios integrations that our little IRC cat knows about. We can set this scheduled downtime for either hosts or services. We can cancel it, we can extend it, you can even leave a comment if you want to be super nice to your coworkers and say why you are scheduling downtime for something. And you can see the status of something. So it'll say, oh, Elasticsearch is critical, but everything else is fine. So go worry about Elasticsearch, but everything else, probably cool for now. And because we're doing this all in IRC, we have a lot of visibility into what everyone is doing with Nagios. One more thing that we do in order to make it easier to deploy changes to Nagios is something that is called perfnag. My colleague on the performance team, Allison McKnight, gave a great talk about this at Velocity last year. Perfnag is a little GUI that lets you set performance alerts and lets you configure those you can see a graph and you're like, oh, I would like to get alerted if this graph does something I don't like. So it will recommend warning and critical thresholds for you based on some SLAs that we have set up. You can zoom in and out, drag and drop those thresholds to see how many times this would have alerted in the past to make sure it looks the way you want it to. And then with one button, it generates the Nagios config for you, copies it into your buffer, and all you have to do is then go and do the try and deploynator combination. So this allows people who work with performance on product teams who are less technical and don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of Nagios configuration to set up Nagios alerts. So with this, we can be pushing our Nagios changes to prod with more confidence that we are not going to break things. Credit and blame for this particular slide can go to the awesome Alice Goldfuss. So now we're moving through our hypothetical day in the life, and you've built your servers, and it's getting to be lunchtime, and you're all set to go get a sandwich or something, and then you get paged. That's always annoying. You just wanted to eat a sandwich, but we're trying to find some ways to make getting these alerts a little less annoying. So one of the biggest issues that we had, and one of the complaints I hear frequently about Nagios, is its interface. You go to Nagios in the browser, and it's ugly, and it's 90s, and you're like, why am I looking at this? Could you not just put some Twitter Bootstrap on it? That would be an improvement. So with the help of Twitter Bootstrap and my dear colleague Laurie Dines, he wrote something that we call Nagdash. This is also open sourced, and it aggregates all of our Nagios instances. I mentioned that we have 4 of them. It aggregates all of that information together. So if you want to get a look at the state of all of our infrastructure, you don't have to go to 4 different Nagioses or Nagii and go deal with 4 of those terrible, terrible interfaces. You can just go to one slightly less terrible interface. This is a lot of red, so let's not look at that. Let's look at some cats instead. As much as Nagdash worked for us earlier on in Etsy's use of Nagios, it hasn't aged terribly well. So I mentioned that we have more and more teams having their own on-call rotations, setting up their own alerts in Nagios, and Nagdash right now doesn't support that very well. So all of the red that was on the previous slide that I'm sorry if that was terrible for any of you to look at, I know, red, salmon, not good colors to see. Most of those servers actually were not things that would page the ops team. So we as the ops team would like to say, what are the things that are currently wrong for our rotation? What are the things that are currently going to be contacting us? So maybe in the future we'd like to enhance Nagdash to allow us to filter by contact group or something like that. There's also, I on purpose did not make that screenshot an animated GIF because there is a blink tag that happens if a host is down. Maybe we should get rid of that because that's super fun. Another way that we are trying to improve our alerting is by use of Nagios Herald, which is a tool that we wrote and open sourced that allows you to add context to Nagios alerts. So everyone's favorite alert to get, disk space. Who here loves getting paged by disk space alerts, right? One of the things that you might want to know if you get a disk space alert is, okay, is this filling up slowly and did it just happen to go over the threshold? Or is something filling up the disk really, really quickly and I should probably get out of bed and deal with it? So Nagios Herald allows you to add that as context so you can pull in, for example, this ganglia graph. You can add any additional information. We also do things like add who the alert got sent to, how often this particular alert has fired in the past week. We can add additional notes, like a link to a runbook, which is usually helpful for more interesting alerts than disk space. So this is allowing us to specify any kind of context that we want. Nagios Herald works by having formatters that do various formatting things and message classes for things like email versus IRC versus text message. Now, Nagios Herald is a Ruby gem, and it is open source, which means that the formatters and message classes that it has are also open source. But we said, what if you had a formatter or a message class that you didn't want to open source? Or maybe your management isn't so fond of you open sourcing things, in which case, I'm sorry, you should come work for us. Or maybe you had something that was so specific to your use case that you didn't think it would be super valuable to clean up and put upstream. So Nagios Herald now supports custom formatters, custom helpers, and custom message classes. And when you are running Nagios Herald, either setting this up in your Nagios config or running it on the command line, you can now specify the locations of these directories, any one or all three of them, and it will do some Ruby magic and let you use now both the built-in formatters and message classes and helpers that come with the gem, as well as your own ones. We've done something pretty interesting with this at Etsy recently. We are using a new formatter and message class that we wrote called Telegram to allow us to kind of customize who is receiving Nagios performance alerts with a little more granularity. So as a background to this, I mentioned that different teams like to get performance alerts on the projects that they are working on, usually 1 or 2 pages. Previously, though, the way that they did this was by signing up for the Perf Alerts mailing list, which meant that they got every single performance alert for every single page, and then they just set up a bunch of Gmail filters to filter out all of the ones that they didn't want, and it was kind of terrible. But as I've mentioned, these people are not they're not technical, but they're not operations engineers, and they don't need to know the ins and outs of Nagios configurations in order to do their jobs. So what we did is we wrote this little page that we called Telegram, because naming is hard and I didn't really want to call it like Nagios Individual Alertinator, which would have been in line with Etsy's naming schemes, but it's a bit of a mouthful. And there's some nice autofill, autocomplete, and people can just type in which pages they want to get alerts for. This is part of our internal staff directory. It saves this to a little database, and then Nagios Herald comes along and says, who else is subscribed to this alert? I'm going to add them as an additional contact, and now people can sign up for individual alerts. Because as much as we've tried to make the Nagios deploy process better, it's still not super fun, let's be real. So we have all this customization with Nagios Herald that is allowing us to add more context, more information to our alerts, to make alerts that are so easy to get that even your cat could respond to them, but don't put your cats on call, they will not actually respond to alerts. So now you're done dealing with this alert that you've gotten your lunch, and you realize that as an on-call person, you would really like to be able to track the alerts that you're getting because you like graphs, and graphs are awesome. So with Ops Weekly, you can do this. This is something else that we've written and open sourced. One thing that it allows us to do that we really like is to generate these on-call reports. So each week, the person who is on call will go and they will tag and categorize each alert and say, was it actionable, was it not actionable, and why? Kind of like the Google form that we saw on Monday asking, was this alert useful to track down and to diagnose an actual problem? We wanted to know if the alerts that we're getting are things that people are actually taking action on. So this is how we figured out that new boxes getting deployed into Nagios without being in scheduled downtime in Nagios was causing us a lot of unactionable alerts, so we were able to fix that. We also have sleep tracking. We've got jawbones that we wear on an opt-in basis. There's a little script that we can run to put that data into Graphite and then generate sleep reports, because we care about our on-call engineers, and yes, people are going to get woken up. That's not super fun, but we'd like to make sure that people aren't getting woken up too much, that the number of times and the amount of sleep that they're losing isn't going up and to the right, because some numbers are good to go down and to the right. So we like to have this information available so you can, go to your manager and be like, hey, look how much sleep I've lost. I need one of those 3-day weekends we were talking about. We have per user reports that you can see. So we've got like heat maps of when you get alerts. For some reason, I never seem to get paged between 7 and 8 in the morning. So I know that if I want to keep up with my FitOps when I'm on call, 7 to 8 in the morning is a great time to work out, because for some reason I just don't get paged then. I can see how my on-calls have been over time to see if they're getting better or worse. And we can do that on a team-wide basis as well. So we can see that over time, the alert volume has been trending downwards. It was pretty bad near the beginning there. Let's not talk about that week. But we can see that, for example, the percentage of alerts that were actionable is still pretty variable. So if we are going and prioritizing the work that we want to do as a team around our monitoring and alerting, we might decide to say, let's look into making our alerts more actionable. So Ops Weekly is a really great thing that allows us to figure out what's waking us up so we can prioritize what we want to be working on. And now finally, it's the end of the day and you're getting ready to go home and you say, it would really be nice if I knew if something was going to wake me up tonight. I mean, the dream is obviously to not get woken up at night, but knowing if something is going to go wrong would be a step in the right direction. So you ask your Magic 8 Ball and it says try again later, Outlook fuzzy, something like that. Not super helpful, but we decided that we could actually make things a little bit better. So I mentioned that we were using Ops Weekly to track actionable versus non-actionable alerts, and we realized that a lot of alerts were not actionable because downtime was either not set or it had expired. And so some known issue, like maybe there was, again, we run on servers with hardware, and sometimes that hardware has to be replaced. And so we're like, okay, we know that this box is down because it's waiting on like new SSDs. Just shut up and don't alert on it. So we put it into scheduled downtime, but sometimes then that downtime expires and pages people, which is annoying enough in the middle of the day, but it's even more annoying in the middle of the night. So we had a monitoring hack week last year, and we wrote something that we called the on-call bedtime story. So what this is it emails the on-call person at 5 p.m., their local time. It knows about time zones and where we each work. And it says, here's everything that is currently in downtime in a not okay state in Nagios, where the downtime will expire within 24 hours. So here are things that currently not alerting because of the scheduled downtime, but they will start alerting within 24 hours, such as overnight when you're trying to sleep. We have things like the author of who set the downtime, whether that was somebody setting it in the Nagios interface itself, or via IRC-cat, or with the automatic downtime from Deployinator. If somebody left a comment on this, it will say what the comment is. So now you know like who to talk to, and if they were nice enough to leave a comment, you might know even why they put the box in downtime without having to go talk to them. So in this case, I was able to say, oh, this is one of our Elasticsearch servers, it needs new SSDs. Obviously, those aren't going to get fixed overnight, so I'm just going to extend this scheduled downtime for another week until those SSDs come in. This also has given us more visibility. So one of my colleagues, Patrick, got this, and there are a lot of performance alerts here. And he said, wait, we're not supposed to be getting performance alerts on ops. Why are these here? So he was able to say, oh, Kristen wrote these checks. Go talk to Kristen. We figured out that something with our templating wasn't working right. And so he was able to avoid getting these like 15, 20 alerts overnight because he got this bedtime story that told him, and he was able to fix them before he left for the day. There's also an on-call bedtime story webpage where we can see everything that is currently in downtime that still has issues. So I can, sort it by who set the downtime and say, here's everything that I put in downtime. I'm going to be a good on-call citizen, and I'm going to go fix those things. So now, at the end of the day, we can go to sleep knowing that if we do get woken up, at least it won't be because some stupid downtime expired. To summarize, old monitoring system, new monitoring tricks. Nagios is really good at one thing, and that is like running checks and getting their results. You can argue about how good it is at that, but we find that it is actually very useful for that, but we want to decide then how we can take those results and make them most useful to us. And this is where it's all about customization, because what is most useful to us at Etsy won't necessarily be the most useful to you. We found out that we had a lot of issues, for example, with machines coming out of downtime, but that might not be your biggest problem that you want to tackle first. Some of the tools that we have, we've got Chef and this try library and Deployinator for better deployments and this automatic scheduled downtime. We have Nagios Herald that we use for context and these custom alert subscriptions. We have Ops Weekly to track sleep and alerting trends, and this on-call bedtime story to help us get a little more sleep. Most of these are open sourced. I will post slides that have links to the projects that we have that are open source. And I think the most important thing for us is that we are always iterating and improving on this. You know, there was the thing a few years ago with hashtag monitoring sucks, and we didn't just say, okay, our monitoring sucks. Well, I guess we're not getting sleep forever. We also didn't fix all of these issues all at once. We didn't like sequester ourselves away for a couple quarters and say, we're gonna fix all of monitoring and alerting. So as we figure out which things are the most painful, as our infrastructure grows and changes, we're able to, you know, develop more of these tricks. Nothing is going to be 100% perfect out of the box. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. But we are focused on taking the tools that we know, that we already have, and we're focusing on composing them together, on making things pluggable, and on making things customizable and customizing them to work best for us. So hopefully you can take some of these tricks and use them as inspiration to spiffy up your own monitoring tools. Thank you.